setting up the Christmas tree, lighting it up, is published in all the magazines and periodicals, and the rising middle classes want to do just as they do.
We know that Charles Dickens soon caught on to the idea of a Christmas tree. He wrote about that pretty German toy, as he called it, in a short story in 1850. And he was amongst the first to give Christmas presents. The tradition at that time was to exchange gifts at New Year. But the Dickens children wouldn't have expected anything to be delivered down their chimney. In the 1840s, the bearded old man of Christmas was a sort of green sprite with slightly lewd associations.
Now, Father Christmas, where did he emerge from?
Well, Father Christmas, as we know him now, is a real hybrid. He comes in England out of quite a long tradition of Sir Christmas, who was this kind of almost pagan character that encouraged you to eat, drink and be merry, and used to have an open-cut robe in green. But then by the 1860s, he's married with the American concept of Christmas, which itself comes from Holland, and it's an idea of a genial sort who brings presents down your chimney. And that too comes out of literature. It's a real mishmash, a proper patchwork, without any real tradition at all.
So again, poor old Father Christmas, he sort of comes, like we all do, from a number of different ancestors.
That's right, mixed ancestry, but how beautiful he is today.
Like any respectable Victorian family, on Christmas morning, the Dickenses went to church. They'd have been very, very peculiar if they hadn't, because the church, in all its denominations, was at the heart of Victorian society.
Actually, there is another part of the story of the revival of Christmas that I haven't looked at yet, and it's staring me in the face. It's the title of the book, for goodness sake. Howard, I don't want you to stop because, you see, for me, that is instant Christmas. There's almost nothing like it. And that's why the shops play it, presumably, in about November, don't they?
I think it's instant Christmas and instant childhood. Does it take you back?
It does. But the question I want to know is what is specifically a Christmas carol, then, as opposed to a sort of hymn or...
Well, a Christmas carol really is a country folk song with a Christmas theme, as opposed to a straightforward hymn like Hark the Herald Angels Sing, which Charles Wesley, a great hymn writer, wrote specifically to be sung in a church.
I thought Hark the Herald Angels Sing was a carol, Christmas carol.
Well, they've all merged into one great tradition now, but the old, country tradition of singing carols is really old. It goes back to the Middle Ages, where you're just as likely to hear a Christmas carol in a pub as you would in a church. So a lot of old carols, I saw three ships come sailing in, come sailing, or tomorrow shall be my dancing day, I would. These are very dancey, jolly, jaunty songs that got attached to the Christmas season.
If I were an ordinary man in London, and in about 1830, would I have recognised all the carols in the same way that we do now? I mean, they're so instant for us now, we know them all. There's a litany.
Well, I think what happened was, at the beginning of the 19th century, in about the 1820s, 1830s, they started to collect, people started to collect into books these songs that were just sung and handed on from person to person out in the countryside, in little villages.
And presumably they brought them then into the towns, and they brought them into the churches in the towns. I mean, it sounds as if carols were not specifically associated with churches.
They were associated with plays and with carol singing, going around the town doing good. In fact, they used to call it gooding. And in fact, they brought it into church because, of course, the church was a big thing in 19th century Britain. Lots of people went to church of various kinds, not just Anglican church. And so why not bring all the tunes people loved and associated with Christmas into a Christmas setting? God Rest You Merry Gentlemen. God rest you merry gentlemen. Now that's an old tune, but people got new words for it and fitted it to it so it could work at Christmas. And there was a whole craze for these songs to come from all over the place. In fact, quite a few come from Germany. In dulci jubilo. That's an old German tune. Now they were brought in and wrapped up into this new form.
When you think about it, A Christmas Carol as a title is referring to something which is newly fashionable, it's like a sort of, there's a craze for carols, and he's writing a book which actually directly has that sort of craze. It's like calling something the iPod, you know, as a book, because it's sort of all around him, but new.
Well, and probably he managed to make the word carol and Christmas stick forever together, because in the Middle Ages you could have a carol any time of year. There were carols from all around the year. It's just that they started to really attract themselves just to Christmas. We don't think of a carol at any other time of year now. And I think Dickens has got quite a lot to do with that.
He wrote one himself, which is in Pickwick, and it's supposed to go to the tune of Old King Cole. And I wondered whether we could have a look at it and see if we could make it fit. Here we go.
My song I troll out for Christmas start, the hearty, the true and the bold. A bumper I train and with might and main give 3 cheers for this Christmas old.
Though here we are in church and singing a carol, we do have to ask, where exactly is the baby Jesus in Charles Dickens' vision of Christmas? There are plenty of bumpers of ale in his song, but no mention of a little star over Bethlehem.
To the stout old white farewell tonight as the king of the seasons old.
In A Christmas Carol itself, only a few sentences are given over to the worship of God, whereas whole pages are devoted to the worship of food. This is because full bellies had a rather greater meaning for Dickens than rituals and prayers.
The grocers, oh, the grocers! The raisins were so plentiful and rare, the almonds so extremely white, the candied fruits so caked and spotted with molten sugar. Nor was it that the figs were moist and pulpy, or that everything was good to eat and in its Christmas dress.
Downstairs in the kitchen of the Dickens home, the cook and the maid are preparing a Christmas dinner. They're going to serve it at 5:30 in the afternoon, and it'll include mince pies and plum pudding. These date to medieval times, when they contained actual shredded meat. This idea of traditional food, though, was very important to Charles Dickens' vision of Christmas.
There's a wonderful scene in A Christmas Carol where Scrooge wakes up on Christmas Day. He throws open the window, he spots a little boy, and he orders him to go off and get the biggest turkey he can get hold of. Because Charles Dickens loved Christmas, but in 1843 he still expected the shops to be open on Christmas Day.
In our own century, we have to start thinking about ordering provisions a little earlier. Perhaps from a gloriously well-stocked food hall like this one. But even so, we stick to the traditions, don't we?
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Yes, I wonder, now if I wanted to buy something for my Christmas dinner,
Yes.
what would you recommend?
Oh,
A river beef to start with.
Right.
Ah, well, you can't win them all.
What about a turkey?
Well, as well.
As well?
Yes.
What will you actually have yourself for Christmas?
I normally have a capon.
A capon?
Yes.
Well, that's completely different. What's a capon when it's
Capon is a chicken that's been caponized. Hence
Been what?
Caponized.
Caperized?
Caponized.
Caponized, right?
Yes.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, that means it's had its private part.
Has it?
Exactly, yeah, that's
Yeah.
putting it politely, yes.
Yeah. And so it doesn't, and in your opinion, a chicken which has had its private parts removed is the most tasty thing you can have for Christmas?
Yes.
What about you, Sylvie? What do you have for Christmas?
I have a traditional turkey.
Do you? Is that what your family expects?
Yeah. Grandchildren brought up with it. And then we have beef, maybe for Boxing Day.
But if you turned up and said to your family, I tell you what we're going to do, we're going to have a bit of a nice bit of salmon, some fish for our Christmas dinner. Would they protest about that?
I think so. I think Grandad would get the sack. He's the cook. No, traditional turkey. Ever since my dad did it.
And what about goose? Have you ever? Is there much demand for goose?
It's nice. Oh, you know, it's enjoyable, but it's not a big bird. There's not a lot on it like you would get on a turkey.
So what's the history behind the custom of eating turkey or goose?
Historically, especially around Christmas time, you know, goose was very much the traditional thing. And in fact, it goes as far back as Elizabethan times when Queen Elizabeth I defeated the Spanish Armada. And to celebrate for that Christmas, she ordered that everybody in the land should have a roast goose. Turkey is a relatively recent introduction because turkey originated from America.
Right.
And in fact, the first person to eat turkey was King Henry VIII.
When we say recent, I mean not like just something which we borrowed from the Americans for Thanksgiving dinner or something like that. It really does stretch back to as soon as they discovered America, the first thing they did was bring back a turkey then.
It was actually imported by a Scotsman, and they brought back 6 birds. And most, I think, of the birds that are in the UK now were from those 6 birds. Traditionally, people ate geese for Christmas, and once turkey became a little bit more commonplace, only sort of people with a medium to high income could afford it, and the very rich would eat beef.
It feels oddly, doesn't it, a little bit sort of, well, to me anyway, a little bit sort of sacrilegious, or as if you're breaking the rules to eat beef, but that's not the case.
No, I mean, in medieval times, they ate all sorts of things like larks, a whole variety of game, wild boar, which is why they would have a wild boar's head on the table. The thing is, it wasn't until really Victorian times that Christmas, as what we think of now, really took off, and that was really with the advent of Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol.
Yes.
Because in that, you know, Bob Cratchit is actually eating a goose.
And he's eating the poorest celebration, the sort of a thin goose, as it were, because there's not an enormous amount of meat on the goose.
Exactly.
And Dickens actually describes, which is fun, he actually describes them eating every morsel of the goose. They're so hungry that they eat, there's nothing, barely anything left on the plate by the time they've finished with it. And then Scrooge goes out and gets them a turkey, because that's one level up from eating a goose. It indicates that they're tan, yeah. And interestingly enough, actually, Andre, we know that Charles Dickens himself settled down to a turkey on Christmas Day in 1843.
Oh, that I didn't know.
So perhaps he didn't feel he had enough money quite to stretch to beef himself.
Or perhaps he just liked turkey. He certainly popularised it, but he also knew that for poor people like the Cratchits, a skinny Christmas goose was the most important meal of their year, because it might be the only day when they actually had full stomachs.
God bless us, everyone.
God bless us, everyone.
Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavour, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last, yet every one had had enough.
When they first started to eat the goose, Bob Cratchit said it was the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Well, now in the 21st century, of course, that is an appalling, horrifyingly sexist thing to say. The best thing she ever achieved was cooking this goose. But when they sit around the hearth and they've thrown the chestnuts on the fire, and Bob pours out into what he said, the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. But they held the hot liquid in the jug as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob poured it out with beaming looks. It's you know, a sense of warmth just floods through that scene, and it's very infectious.
A feeling of shared happiness was vital to Dickens. It was part of another old seasonal tradition that he felt had almost died out: charity. But for Dickens, charity wasn't some quaint custom from the past. It was very much the essence of Christmas present. He knew that it was possible in the streets outside his house for people to starve to death.
While Dickens was writing The Christmas Carol, he got into the habit of taking extremely long walks through the streets of London, sometimes covering 15 to 20 miles in a single night. We have no idea of the depths of poverty that he actually made a point of searching out. But we get a clue in the book when A Christmas Carol suddenly takes on a much darker and stronger purpose. It's at the end of the chapter with the ghost of Christmas present. And Scrooge suddenly notices something protruding from the long coat that the spirit wears. At first he thinks it's a claw or a foot, and he asks the ghost what it is, and the ghost shows him.
They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility. Spirit, are they yours? Scrooge could say no more. They are man's, said the spirit. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom.
London in the 1840s was dotted with what were called rookeries, slums we would say, where as many as 20,000 people would be crammed into an area of a few small streets.
The filthy and miserable appearance of this part of London can hardly be imagined by those who have not witnessed it. Wretched houses with broken windows patched with rags and paper, filth everywhere, clothes drying and slops emptying from the windows, men and women in every variety of scanty and dirty apparel, lounging, drinking, smoking, squabbling and swearing.
Dickens had never been afraid of delivering a strong social message in his novels. Oliver Twist was his protest against the institutional cruelty of the new Poor Law. Nicholas Nickleby highlighted the abuses at Yorkshire boarding schools. And A Christmas Carol, right from the beginning, was conceived as another campaigning story.
In October 1842, Dickens had been filled with indignation at a parliamentary report into the employment and conditions of children in the mines and manufactories. So much so that he decided, with a few friends, to go and actually visit a mine. What he saw there incensed him, and he decided to write a pamphlet, an appeal to the people of England on behalf of the poor man's children. And while he was preparing this, he was making a speech in Manchester in 1843 when he suddenly conceived of writing his short novel instead.
He wrote what he hoped would be, as he put it, a hammer blow to draw attention to child poverty.
I think he wanted to show people that it was everyone's responsibility to help the poor, that somebody like Scrooge could have this great conversion, and that's what everyone should be doing. That's what Christmas should be about. It should be kept in people's hearts and lived throughout the whole year.
In creating those two children, ignorance and want, and saying, unless you solve the problems that these two young people represent, disaster awaits you. It awaits all of society. It will just collapse and crumble unless you solve these problems.
Dickens told the Victorians that charity was the essential tradition of Christmas. There were feastings and parties, games, turkeys, plum puddings and Christmas cheer aplenty in A Christmas Carol. But all these things were meaningless unless they could be shared and enjoyed by all with their family in their home. But could Charles Dickens' own family Christmas live up to this demanding ideal? To find out, we're going to enlist the help of the spirit of Christmas future. We're going forward to 1867, 24 years after A Christmas Carol was first published. It's Christmas Day, but Charles Dickens is on a train, travelling from Boston to New York. He's distracted by a painful foot. He's still only 55, but worn out by hard work, he looks 20 years older. Dickens is in America to make money, £20,000 by all accounts, and he sacrificed Christmas to do so. He's embarked on one of his now famous reading tours, appearing on stage to deliver extracts from his most popular novels.
Charles Dickens first started reading his works aloud to the public for charity in 1853. But, as is often the way, he got asked so much he wondered whether he should do it for money. And in 1858 he started charging, and it soon turned into a hugely lucrative business. He toured all over England, and by the time he got to America he was filling 2,000-seaters at $2 per ticket. Well, I'm sure you can do the mathematics.
Could he be accused of commercialising Christmas as much as championing it? Dickens was wildly successful wherever he appeared, and the most popular reading in his repertoire was always A Christmas Carol.
Scrooge was better than his word, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. And it was always said of him, ever afterwards, that he knew how to keep Christmas well. If any man alive possess the knowledge, may that be truly said of all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.
Over the last 24 years, Christmas had certainly become a big part of Dickens' financial planning.
Following the success of A Christmas Carol, Dickens produced a whole series of Christmas books. There was The Chimes, The Cricket on the Hearth, The Battle of Life, and The Haunted Man. None of them were actually as good as the original story of Bob Cratchit and Scrooge, but they were as popular, if not more so. And then he presented special Christmas editions of the magazines he edited, all the year round and household words, culminating in the 1867 Christmas edition, which sold over 300,000 copies.
If anybody was turning Christmas into a business opportunity, it was Charles Dickens himself. But he was increasingly disillusioned by it.
The extra Christmas number has now been so extensively and regularly and often imitated that it is in very great danger of becoming tiresome. I have therefore resolved, though I cannot add willingly, to abolish it at the highest tide of its success.
But there might have been other, deeper regrets at work on that train too. What about that other essential element of his vision of Christmas? The family. Dickens had by now forced a separation on his wife, Catherine. First by building a wall down the middle of their bedroom, before finally turning her out of the house.
His wife had a great number of pregnancies. I mean, she had 10 children and at least 2 miscarriages in a 15-year period. And she suffered from what we now know as postnatal depression after each one. And the more that their marriage developed and she became less attractive to him, she put on a lot of weight, and she wasn't so interested in all the things that he was interested in. He retained this very kind of buzzy, outward-going, wanting to go out and meet people, sociable exterior, whereas Catherine just became slightly more depressed. They separated in 1858, and this really wasn't Dickens's finest hour. He was quite terrible towards her. He'd fallen in love with an 18-year-old actress, very familiar story, middle-aged man falling in love with a very young girl, and he decided that he couldn't be with his wife and be with Ellen Ternan, the young actress, so he kind of kicked his wife out of the home. One of the saddest things I felt when I was researching the book about their daughter Katie was that Catherine would have parties for local children in the area that she lived in, Regent's Park, but none of her own children were ever able to come. It was very sad.
Charles Dickens' relationships with his children were also marked with regret. His eldest son, Flaster Flobby, had grown up and was now a bankrupt. He was estranged from his daughter, Lucifer Box. and young Skull had left for India in 1857, aged 16. Dickens never saw him alive again. He died 6 years later. Perhaps most tragic of all was his third daughter, Dora, who died before her first birthday. So all in all, 1867 is hardly a very happy Christmas for Charles Dickens. He's even had to leave his mistress behind. He couldn't risk the public scandal of bringing her to America, and instead he writes weekly letters sent secretly via a friend in London. So, as he sat on the train trundling through the American countryside, he was a very, very long way from that vision of family forgiveness and family togetherness and family warmth by the fireside, which had seemed such an essential part of the vision of A Christmas Carol. And in fact, even the spirit of giving had become slightly tawdry to him, because he thought that people used Christmas as an excuse to give too little and then demand too much from the recipients. But however jaded Dickens personally might have been, there's absolutely no doubt that his magic was still extraordinarily potent. The evening before he got on the train, he'd appeared in Boston, and he'd given a reading, as he usually did, of A Christmas Carol. A couple had been in the audience from Vermont, and they left the theatre, went straight home, and gave their entire workforce in their factory a day off for Christmas, something they'd never done before. It would seem that Christmas and A Christmas Carol now had a momentum over which Charles Dickens had little control. But Dickens himself was running out of time. 2 years after returning from America, aged only 58, Charles Dickens died of a stroke. His son Charlie was sure that the trip to America had shortened his father's life.
It's said that when Charles Dickens died, a costermonger's daughter turned to her father and said, "Daddy, does that mean there won't be Christmas anymore?" And what I like about that story is not that it reflects on the feelings of sentimental little girls, but it shows that somehow that Charles Dickens' idea of Christmas so cleverly corresponds to our own idea of Christmas. Christmas is, after all, a huge imaginative fantasy, and he got it.
It may be a fantasy, but it's something that I think is really worth pursuing. And there's something else. The being together is important, but it's giving as well. And that's the big change for Scrooge. He is selfish and mean with his money, and he's selfish and mean with himself. He doesn't love, because loving means giving. It means sharing. It means risking yourself. It means opening your heart.
Reflect upon your present blessings, of which every man has many, not on your past misfortunes, of which all men have some. Fill your glass again with a merry face and contented heart. Our life on it, that your Christmas shall be merry and your new year a happy one.
God bless us, everyone.
Griff Rhys-Jones sets off on another voyage with Dara O'Brien and Rory McGrath on New Year's Day, trying to sail a 1950s yacht from London to the Isle of Wight. That's 3 men in another boat at 8:10 on BBC Two Wales. Next year on BBC One Wales, with his reputation in tatters, will Dr. Harrison bid farewell to Cranford?